A city turned into ghost town, entire blocks laid flat under the rubble, as Israel's bombardment continues day in and day out. Sirens signal yet another fatality in the war. Before the fighting, the Palestinian economy was already slowing down. The World Bank forecast a 3.2% real GDP growth in 2023. That figure is now revised to negative 3.7%, equivalent to approximately $1.5 billion in nominal GDP loss. And almost 85% of workers in the Gaza Strip are out of work. The World Bank has called the loss of life and extent of damages to fixed assets unparalleled. As the war drags on, the scale of the destruction continues to increase, with roughly 80% of communications technology infrastructure damaged and almost 70% of health and education facilities destroyed. The war has not only displaced people, but also Palestinian workers.
The situation is bad. The health, economic, and the humanitarian situations are all bad. Diseases are terrifyingly widespread, and there's a significant shortage of food. Every day I come to work and I witness all the sufferings that we could have never imagined.
And economic collapse is also looming in the occupied West Bank. More than 200,000 Palestinians are unable to work due to the suspension of work permits and restrictions on freedom of movement in and out of Israel, leading to almost 30% of businesses closing down. The war is also having an impact on Israel's economy, which has announced a tripling of its budget deficits with an additional $14 billion to fund its war efforts. Israel's finance ministry revised its estimates for the cost of war to $51 billion for the ongoing year, and the country has acquired $6 billion in debt from international debt investors to keep up spending. The ministry also said they expect the economy to grow at a slower pace of 1.6% next year, down from the 2% forecast. Trade with Israel is also becoming more difficult after attacks by Yemen's Houthis in the Red Sea targeting shippers heading towards Tel Aviv. Nations like Malaysia, who have imposed a ban on all Israeli-owned ships from docking on its ports, are adding to the financial woes. And as Israeli politicians reiterate their commitment to fight on, analysts say this will cause a further fall in investor confidence. Emre Boz, TRT World.
For more on this, we're joined by Leila Hatoum in Beirut. She's a business analyst and political economist focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region. Good to have you back with us, Leila. Before we look at the current state of Gaza's economy, can I ask you about how it was before the current war broke out on October 7th? Because we know it had already been suffering under Israel's 17-year-long blockade. What impact was that having on Gaza?
First of all, thank you for having me again. And when it comes to Gaza, right before October 7, Gaza's economy, GDP actually, was about $600 to $800 million a year, and that's mostly from donations. We had about 75% of the population unemployed, the rate, 75%. And then you had lots of shortage in terms of equipment, materials, food items, because the Israelis were controlling and rationing the materials that goes into Gaza, including food and water. So at one point or another, inflation was soaring high as well. There was a shadow black market at one point or another to the economy over there, and people couldn't find the things that they need, the daily things that you actually have in normal markets. You couldn't find them over there. So the economy was in dire condition. It was not allowed to export anything. You couldn't move around. You couldn't even go fishing beyond a 6-mile radius in the sea. The fishermen couldn't go out and fish. So basically, that also put a strain on all factions of the society, like all sects of the society, rather than just one particular sect. And the only money that came, as I said, to that was pumped into the economy were mostly donations. About 90% of what came into Gaza was mostly donations.
There's no doubt that the sheer loss of human life in Gaza has been the greatest cost of this conflict, but it's also had a devastating impact on its economy, which, as you've just explained, had been suffering greatly. Can you tell us more about the economic toll that Israel's war is having on Gaza right now?
Oh, definitely. I mean, before October 7, the daily income for the average individual in Gaza was $1.5 a day. Now it's zero, and they're all living in debt as well. And when it comes to the economy, it's stagnant. There's nothing happening. They're being bombarded left, right, and center. You have lost all sorts of infrastructure that needs hundreds of billions of dollars to be reconstructed, not tens of billions of dollars. We're talking about over 150 to nearly $200 billion just to rebuild the Gaza Strip, because the attacks are not basically centric to Gaza City in the north or basically central Gaza Strip, but also across the Gaza Strip, all the way down to the south. And don't forget that we have lost schools, we have lost dozens of schools, we have lost dozens of all the businesses usually, and unemployment rate, as I said, it's almost 1%, because the only ones who are working at the moment are the civil defense workers and the medical workers, and all of those, they are not getting paid because money cannot be pumped into the economy at the moment.
Can we take a look at Israel now? Because some analysts are forecasting that the Israeli economy will shrink as a result of this war. And when the war broke out, about 20% of the Israeli workforce was missing from the labour market in October. That's because hundreds of thousands of Israelis were called up to fight. Can you tell us more about the impact that this conflict is having on Israel's economy?
Prior to the conflict, Israel's economy was, the GDP basically was around $488 billion. And at one point or another with this conflict, Israel has literally, there are expectations by Standard & Poor's, for example, for the budget for 2023 to register a 5.3% deficit. 5.3 deficit, basically that's about $24.8 billion in deficit for 2023. Going forward, economists expect it to go and rise basically up to 7% if the situation persists for the Q1 of 2024. To recover from that, it's massive. Don't forget also that their shekel was very volatile. It was literally dropping by over 10%, double digits at one point or another. They had to pump in tens of billions of dollars. They had allocated a package of $45 billion to support their national currency. Their maritime trade had also been impacted. Remember, 70 to 75% of Israel's trade, total trade, happens by sea. And with the attacks from Houthis and threatening the Israeli maritime routes, basically they lost that $42 billion worth of trade via sea. And we're also talking about unemployment rate soaring high. Last month, they issued the really funny numbers. They said that they had added to the economy about 50 to 60,000 new jobs, but this is just because they took the unemployed people and they added them to the reservists. So the reservists, they consider them as working. However, those reservists have to go back to the economy at one point or another. 1/3 of the businesses in Israel, according to the Bureau of Statistics in Israel, have been shut down or are running at 20%, which means the reservists will go back to no jobs. And that will add up to the, the unemployment. Tourism sector has been impacted by around 4%, basically massively. It allocates about 4% of the GDP. We're talking about $20 to $22 billion that are now basically have run down to nearly $2 billion. So imagine the amount of losses. We have calculated all the economic and financial losses in terms of lost opportunities and lost FDIs to the Israeli economy. And that amounted to about $300 to $320 billion in total. That cannot, and not a single country can basically recover from that in 1 year, no matter how much money you pump into it. So they need at least 7 to 10 years to actually recover from this war.